Welcome to Saltier Politics. This week we're doing something a little different, and you're going to get saltier with the co-host this week.
Yeah, we've interviewed a lot of really interesting people on this podcast, but I feel like we haven't really spoken much to each other, and we're awesome, and I think we should speak a little bit more to each other. So once in a while, I think we just have a much more prolonged discussion about us and what we think about politics, what makes us salty, but also go into detail about some of the events of the week. So with all that, Emily, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, this week was an interesting week for technology. And by that, I mean, when the Google CEO testified to Congress, he had a lot of great moments. Well, we saw a lot of great moments with lawmakers revealing their complete and total ignorance about technology. So as your job as, consulting or a strategist, how would you kind of consult some of these judiciary lawmakers to not look like complete noobs?
Well, first of all, the average age of members of the House and Senate is a little older than millennials. So I don't know that I remember, I think it was a congressman or a senator from Alaska, I can't remember which one, that referred to the internet as the interwebs. So a series of tubes that connect things. So first and foremost, I think a lot of these people just don't have much experience with the internet. They might use email, maybe. They might text, maybe. But they certainly don't know much about coding or much about how the internet works. But by the way, neither do I, so I'm not pretending that I'm an expert at this. But it seems to me like maybe they should at least get some staff who could help them. And the staff, I'm sure, does help them. But once you're sitting in a committee room, and having worked in the Senate, I know this well, you sit behind the senator, you can slip them a note, or a congressman, and slip them a note, but you certainly can't ask the question for them. And so you saw this when Mark Zuckerberg was testifying a few months ago on Facebook, and they let him get away with murder, not because they intended to let him get away with murder, but because they just didn't know how to debate something that he was so much more well-versed in than they were. And so I think that's partially part of the problem. We just are dealing with people who are not in the same space, either generationally or technologically.
All right. What would you do post, for example, the Steve King moment when he held up his iPhone and, the Google CEO said Google and Apple are different companies? What is the kind of cleanup you do after that? Or do you do any?
Well, if I worked for Steve King, I'd be doing a lot more cleanup than just on that. Steve King, I feel, needs somebody to go after him with what you use in a circus elephant. Clean up what comes out of the back of them. But look, I don't know that you can clean that up. But if you're interviewing the CEO of a company, you at least have to know what the company does. And you at least have to know that they don't manufacture iPhones or iPads if they're at Google, any more than you would ask the guys Tim Cook at Apple about Google's products, or Mark Zuckerberg about Apple's products. It's just, it stands to reason that at least you should be prepared. A lot of these, not all, I shouldn't castigate them, but I think a lot of these longtime elected officials kind of go in and wing it. Like, they're not that interested. The reality is, I don't think Steve King, I shouldn't speak for him, but I don't know that a lot of these people on these committees are interested in this topic. It's a confusing topic to them. It's not a topic that they understand. And it's not a topic that they're particularly interested in understanding. But it strikes me that at least you have to have people in the real world on the Hill who know what they're talking about when it comes to this. And certainly Congressman King does not know what he's talking about when it comes to this. And I hasten to add a lot of other issues that he talks about on a daily basis.
I would absolutely agree to that. Now kind of moving on to clapbacks, really. And this has to do with the Pelosi-Schumer Trump showdown at the White House. First, I would like to note Pelosi's savage clapback to Trump, who said she's in a situation where it's not easy for her to talk right now. And then she bit back at him, quote, "Please don't characterize the strength that I bring to this meeting as the leader of the House Democrats who just won a big victory." Please respond.
I mean, it's so funny because you look at social media and every Trump accolade out there is like, he totally owned her. He totally owned her. Under what scenario is he totally owning her? I mean, I tweeted this image. I don't know how many people watch Mad Men, but there's this very famous, iconic scene in Mad Men where Peggy Olson, who's this woman that started out as a secretary in 1960 in this ad agency, by the end of the series is literally walking out with her boxes in her hands and a cigarette in her mouth and sunglasses on. And she's just kind of strolling, swaggering down the hallway because she knows that she's come into her own. And that's really Nancy Pelosi. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, for all that she sometimes is inartful when she speaks publicly, for all that she's not necessarily the greatest messenger on television for Democrats, she knows how to play the game and she knows how to tweak people. And she's been around a really long time. I mean, before she was Nancy Pelosi, she was Nancy D'Alessandro. Her father was a very long time powerful mayor of Baltimore. She was literally born to do this. And some people who are born to do this don't do well, but she happens to have excelled at it. And she had him, and she just owned him. And that's not a partisan analysis. She just did. I mean, he's spewing information about the wall. She's saying, we're giving you money for the wall. He's saying, why don't you pass it? She's saying, why doesn't the Republican House pass it? You guys are in charge of everything now. Pass it, pass it. He mansplains the legislative process to her, which is hilarious. If you recall, he basically said, well, you need 60 votes in the Senate to get anything done. Well, why didn't the House just pass it first and then punt it over to the Senate? What's the House afraid of? Why don't the Republicans in the House pass legislation to fund the wall? Suddenly Trump said, I want the shutdown. If I don't get my wall funding, I'm going to shut down the government. We've heard this before. This is like the third or fourth or fifth time that he's threatened to shut down the government for the wall. And lo and behold, the government has not been shut down for the wall. The government will not be shut down for the wall. He's not getting his wall, which only forced him to do what I thought was the most interesting mental contortion of the week, which is to say that because they renegotiated NAFTA to make it fundamentally, it's, meet the new NAFTA, same as the old NAFTA. They just gave it a different name, kind of like Kentucky Fried Chicken is now known as KFC, but it's the same product. He's now saying because we renegotiated NAFTA, Mexico is going to be paying for the wall because Mexico is going to be giving us so much more money. It's just a blatant lie. And I wish more people would call it for what it is, because it is a blatant lie. But again, the ability for him to tweet this nonsense out, and fine, he's not all there, but for people, and a lot of people who I genuinely like, who are supporters of his, to agree with him on this, without looking at the underlying facts, without thinking remotely about what he's saying, that to me is more troubling, because that just says to me, again, it bears repeating, he said that if he shot somebody in Fifth Avenue, his supporters would stand by him, and he's shooting the truth on Fifth Avenue, certainly on a daily basis, or in Constitution Avenue, or on Pennsylvania Avenue, and they're standing by him no matter what he says, including this ridiculous assertion about these campaign finance violations, which we can get into.
Well, just back to the meeting, we have to note Mike Pence's major role in it, that he looked like he just got out of the DeLorean and was figuring out what year he was in.
Do you think Mike Pence is sitting here thinking, let me look around the Oval Office, there's a good chance this guy's going to get impeached, let me think about the curtains that Mother and I can put in here? Or do you think Mike Pence is sitting there thinking, God, I sold my soul for political ambition because I'm Mike Pence, and while I don't agree with Mike Pence on anything, he's been around the block once or twice, and he knows how full of BS Donald Trump is on this issue.
I think he was trying to make himself disappear.
I would too. We've all been in that situation, mainly when we were teenagers, when our parents are saying something that we're totally mortified about, and we're pretending we're not hearing them. It's hard to do when you're the vice president of the United States, but who in Donald Trump's orbit? I can't think of anybody, not Jared Kushner, not Ivanka Trump, certainly not Mike Pence, who, while certainly not Kellyanne Conway, whom I've known a long time, and while I haven't spoken to her since she got the job in the White House, I've always known her to be a very bright woman. These people all say the right thing publicly, but can you imagine just cringing internally every day, multiple times a day, what comes out of Donald Trump's mouth? It's just abysmal. And again, I work for a lot of politicians, and I'm sure that once or twice they've said things that have made me cringe, but not to this level, and not to the point where I'm thinking, what life decision got me to this place, and is it worth it?
What do you think potential new chief of staff Jared Kushner, how do you think he would react to this?
I mean, Jared Kushner is so interesting to me, because I think that's what Trump kind of wanted all along. As the walls close in, this always happens in every Godfather movie too. Like you get rid of Tom Hagen and you suddenly start relying on Michael Corleone. I'm not suggesting they're all mobsters, but I'm suggesting that when the walls are closing in, and when you've got so many investigations and so many people looking at you and so many people poking at you. Who do you go to? I mean, you go to your family, you rely on your family. And I mean, he's getting turned down. First, Nick Ayers turned him down after it was all but a done deal to be chief of staff. And Nick Ayers let it hang out there for a long time that he was going to be chief of staff. He let the speculation run a really long time, and then belatedly said, "Yeah, sorry, not interested." So,
what's the political motivation behind that? The kind of waiting and being no.
It makes you look good. It makes you look powerful. And then all of a sudden you say, "No, I'm really, I would have been the guy, but it's my decision not to do it." I'm sure Nick Ayers had both personal and professional reasons not to do it. And then you have Chris Christie coming out this week and saying, "I don't want it. I'm not interested in it." And I'm not sure if he really is not interested in it or whether he knew he wasn't going to get it. And so since he's been passed over so often for so many jobs, whether it was better for him to say, you're not dumping me. I'm the one that's dumping you. But the reality is, I don't know how many competent people want to be the chief of staff in this administration. And so Jared, by virtue of inexperience and by virtue of being married into the family, I think almost has no choice. It'll certainly be good for business for him to be the chief of staff to the president. What's interesting is the chief of staff needs to have, top security clearance.
Right. How is that going to work?
And how is that going to work? Also, Jared Kushner may or may not be under federal investigation. We don't know. How's that going to work? If nothing else, Jared Kushner has a criminal defense attorney, Abby Lowell, on the payroll. So I'm not sure how that works in being able to do the job of chief of staff while at the same time having to deal with a criminal defense investigation or a criminal investigation. So I don't know, but I mean, nothing about this administration makes sense. And it may be Jared Kushner for all we know. I mean, maybe that's a trial balloon that they shot up, but at the end of the day, he may be the only one left standing. Who knows? If Christie doesn't want it, if Kelly basically walked out the door, if Nick Ayers turned it down, I don't know. I mean, who does he turn to, and how does that happen? I don't know.
It will be interesting to comment on as well. So kind of switching gears a little bit, recently actress Sandra Locke died at 74 years old, and her death is being defined by her relationship with actor Clint Eastwood. She was in a lot of movies, in the Dirty Harry movies with him, and really all of the headlines are Clint Eastwood's ex, starred in 6 of his movies, dies. And it's just something that is kind of frustrating to me, because just even in writing obituaries and stuff like that, in the headline, just defining a whole person's life based on their relationship with somebody is very frustrating.
It is, it's been so frustrating to women for so long that you had Queen Elizabeth I refusing to get married because she didn't want to be defined by being somebody's wife. And consistently, it happens. I mean, it happens so often that it's incredibly annoying to me. And I worked, when we had first broached this subject, I worked a long time ago, 5 years ago now, for the Labour Party in London. And it was right in 1993 when Hillary Clinton was just taking up healthcare reform on behalf of the White House. And I remember I was a very low level, not even a staffer, I was an intern, full-time intern there, but my boss took me for lunch to the House of Lords, which I thought was really cool. And I ended up having lunch with a couple of, they're called peeress, baronesses, women peers. And they were talking about Hillary Clinton, how much they loved Hillary Clinton, isn't she great? And I said, yeah, I'm not sure about her being in charge of healthcare reform. And they said, why? And I said, well, I mean, what are her qualifications? They said, well, she's very smart. I said, I'm sure she is very smart, but she's not the expert on this issue. I mean, surely there are people who are better experts on this issue. And she's basically there because she's the first lady and she's married to the president. And that's why she's in charge of healthcare reform. And they said, well, yeah, but what's wrong with that? And I said, well, I would think that somebody should be there not because they're married to somebody. And then I kind of looked around and I thought, oh my God, I'm in the House of Lords. Like, you people are only here clearly because of the Lucky Sperm Club, or you married well, or some of these actually became rose to the peerage because of their accomplishments. But I mean, historically, the House of Lords has been there because born into the manor, right? So it's the same kind of situation here, and it's not a partisan thing. I think that about Hillary Clinton all the time. I mean, a woman who was incredibly accomplished in her own right, but got to where she got in large part because of whom she married and had to own his sins throughout the campaign. I mean, the fact that, she had to shoulder the blame for the way her husband treated her by cheating on her, I think is the most glaring example. More and more, I think it's just Sandra, this example, Sandra Locke, is a very good one. I mean, this is an accomplished actress, and yet she's Clint Eastwood's ex. And I wonder if Diane Keaton would ever be Woody Allen's ex when she passes away, or whoever else she dated in Hollywood. It's constant, and it's kind of perennial. It just happens all the time, and women are always Mrs. somebody or somebody's ex. I wonder how often you have men who died who are somebody's ex. I'm trying hard to remember an instance. Maybe people can tweet us about it and let me know. I'm sure there are examples of this, but when was the last time you had a man die and somebody said, oh, he was so married to so-and-so, and that's his claim to fame? I mean, when Brad Pitt dies, are people going to say he was Angelina Jolie's ex?
Right.
No, but here's Jennifer Aniston, who's apparently still sitting here crying, tears over Brad Pitt dumping her, even though it sounds to me like she moved on fairly quickly. But this is what we all think about. Oh, poor Jennifer Aniston. This consistent concept of women either being dumped or women marrying somebody for fame or fortune. It's just endemic to the way we treat women in this society, and it's incredibly frustrating to me. This is just one most recent example of that.
I know, and what's also frustrating is even writing headlines and making videos at work for it. It's like, well, you want to include Clint Eastwood for SEO purposes, and it's like
SEO, search engine optimization, in case people don't know. So.
Right, and but still, it still just frustrates me. I want that to be the third paragraph in it. Like, by the way, she did date this guy, and they did make great movies together. But it's just It's very interesting. It's sad when you define people based on an episode in their life that's not of their own making. And right.
I'll use myself as an example. Randomly this week, somebody sent me a clip, Emily, and then I sent it to you, and both of us had the same reaction. We're like, huh, where's this coming from? That they're making a movie about
oh my gosh,
the Fox News Roger Ailes saga, and it's a Nicole Kidman movie. I think she's playing Gretchen Carlson, and then there's a Charlize Theron, starring role in it, and she's playing Megyn Kelly, and that's all fine. And then randomly, I got this. I mean, when I say randomly,
the text from you, I just got it, and I was around people, and I'm like, wait.
I know there are words on it that we probably could use on this podcast, but I'd rather not. But both of us were like, what? But anyway, some actress who I'm sure is lovely. I actually saw her in The Help a long time ago, and Anna O'Reilly is playing me, which is bizarre. But all I kept thinking about is, okay, so I've had a 25-year career, and a lot of it was spent at Fox. But most of it was spent doing something completely unrelated, which is working as a political consultant, as a crisis communications consultant for corporations. And suddenly, this very, very, very minor episode in my life is that's what's being made into a movie. I mean, the movie's not clearly about me, but that episode of my life is what people are focusing on. And again, it's more to your point about random episodes of your life that are focused on that really are not the focus of your personal life. And in that case, going back to Sandra Locke, I mean, I'm sure the raison d'etre of her life professionally was not that she was Clint Eastwood's ex.
Right.
It was she was an actress, and that's what she did for a living. And that's what she should have been known for, because she did a lot of good work. And unfortunately, because of the need for, as you said, for SEO and the need for people to get clicks and for salacious stuff, women, more often than men, but women are really tagged with the most salacious part of their personal or professional lives rather than what they've worked towards their entire career. She'd spent her entire career being an actress. That's not what we were hearing about. We're hearing that she was somebody's ex. And so that I find really annoying, especially this week in light of what we just discussed.
definitely more to come on as that
Right.
transpires. Anyway, well, still speaking of iniquity, recently we saw that frat president at Baylor University, Jacob Anderson, got away with a plea deal after apparently raping a student. It's pretty much this whole iniquity of white males getting this kind of sentence while someone like Cyntoia Brown gets locked away and fights for her clemency.
Well, I mean, where to begin? First of all, disparity in sentencing and racial disparities in sentencing continue to be ridiculous, which is why we'll get to this later, but why especially marijuana legalization to me is a prime example of that. I mean, think about the kids that get locked up for possession of pot. It's usually, unfortunately, statistically, the poor black kid in the inner city, not the rich preppy kid in the suburbs whose parents have the money to get a good lawyer to get them off for having a I don't even know, dime bag of
Right.
This is how much I don't know. This is how much I know about pot. I don't know what the quantity is. It a dime bag, whatever the quantities are of marijuana possession. But this is another really good example. And Baylor, it was a good Christian school down in Texas, and that's really unchristian behavior this guy engaged in.
Right, and the evidence against him. So pretty much his victim claimed that at a frat party in 2016, he let her out back where she lost consciousness. He raped her and choked her. And then she woke up. She was alone, lying face down and gagging on her own vomit. And then later, a sexual assault nurse verified the rape. So, I mean, this had evidence.
Yeah, certainly. I think we don't, more and more, I think, especially when it comes to sexual assault, you have people who just legitimately don't take women as seriously as they should when it comes to this kind of situation. I mean, I get that you're innocent until proven guilty. I completely agree with that notion. I'm a very strong believer in that notion. But it's very rare that you don't take something to a grand jury when something like this happens. But very often it doesn't get taken to a grand jury, even when there's physical evidence, even when there's really no reason to take it to a grand jury. Meanwhile, the other case that you mentioned is a woman who killed her attacker. I mean, this guy was about to rape her, and she was under 18, I believe, right?
Right.
Yeah.
She was forced into prostitution and still underage when this...
Right. And so she killed the man that was trying to have sex with her, and she just got the book thrown at her, and she deserves clemency from the governor. But how a judge could sentence her to that when it was all but self-defense, it makes no sense to me. I mean, where is it just where a rapist gets off with a slap on the wrist, but the victim is the one who, for fighting back, ends up in prison? And interestingly, I mean, you have, these are the same people that talk about stand your ground laws, and if somebody comes into your house and you feel threatened, you get the right to sue them. Okay, well, this woman was threatened. I mean, she was underage, she was getting raped, she killed the guy. How much more of a threat could it be?
It's a good guy with a gun up until I think the person's a minority.
Yeah. But if it's a black woman with nothing but self-defense, then suddenly she's this horrible human being that needs to be locked up from society. We have a long way to go in this country when it comes to racial disparity in the justice system. And I remember saying this and outnumbered a couple of years ago, and it really got everybody on my panel kind of upset with me. But I said at the time, my little blonde son is just not going to come under the same kind of scrutiny by cops on the streets of New York as if he were an African-American boy. And everybody kind of said, how dare you? And that's not true. And it is true. It's just absolutely true. I got, a couple of years ago, I was walking to Fox actually to do Megyn Kelly's show, and it was dark at night, and I was walking past Lincoln Center, which if everybody knows New York, anybody who knows New York knows is a very safe neighborhood. And these African-American kids came up behind me, and there was maybe 5 or 6 of them, and grabbed my iPhone out of my hand and ran off, stole my phone. So the security guard at Lincoln Center saw them, started running, chasing after them. I started chasing after them, although when you're wearing heels, as you would at Fox, it's a little hard to do. And the cops showed up, and the cops were wonderful, but the cops literally started pulling over every African-American kid that they saw. They're like, is that him? Is that him? Is that her? Is that the person? Is that the person? And I said, I can't speak to that. I don't know. And ultimately, they never caught them because I didn't know what they looked like and couldn't really remember what they looked like. But what was interesting to me is I'm wondering if it was a bunch of white kids, whether they start grabbing a bunch of white kids off of Broadway and 66th Street and saying, is that him? Is that her? Is that him? Is that her?
Right.
I doubt it.
No, and then also I think the white kids that they do grab will get, as I would see, as many of my friends probably would get entitled and just be like, are you talking to me? Do you have a right to do that? Whereas you would never see, I think in most cases, a black person to kind of talk back to a police
it's funny
like
because one of these kids actually did start talking back to the cops, and he's like, yo, you're not treating me well, man, like stop, and I'm just looking at this kid, I'm thinking, just stop for your own sake, just stop.
Right.
Because you can see the cops are just like they're just
right.
And again, I don't want to say that the cops here were doing any, the cops were wonderful to me. They actually gave me a ride to Fox. They waited for me and gave me a ride home afterwards. It was just completely above and beyond what you could expect. They were wonderful. But I have to say, of course, because if you were starting to pull those little white kids off the street, mom and dad would get involved very quickly, especially in that neighborhood. It's a fairly affluent neighborhood, and then suddenly you just wouldn't do it. It's cultural, it's endemic. I'm not suggesting at all that these cops are racist. They're not. But I just think generally we have such a predisposition in this country to treat people unfairly under the law, and I can only imagine the tweets we're going to get and the comments we're going to get based on this particular conversation. But I'm telling you, it's just true, and I say that as somebody, again, who's the mother of a little blonde kid who's certainly not ever going to get looked at with suspicion in the same way he'd be looked at if he were an African American, and that's sad.
No, and just one final thing to add to that, but it's really just, I think, like your son and my brother, it's something that they will probably not have to think about in the way even you and I think about walking down the street, because when it's dark out, I think I definitely pick different roads to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, more, but whereas when you're a guy, you don't really have to think about and be so aware of your body and where you are as much. And those are just little things that just weigh on you that I don't think that they even have to really get weighed down by.
Yeah, it's interesting. Bill de Blasio, who's the mayor of New York, who I don't particularly like at all, but he was right about this, and he got such a raft of nonsense about it when he said it. But he is he's Caucasian, and he's married to Shirley MacRae, who's African American, and they have 2 children, and obviously the kids are biracial. And his son Dante had this big afro and looks, I would say looks more African American than white. And what Bill de Blasio said was that he had to have the conversation with Dante, his son, at one point about, hey, you got to be careful because of what you look like, and just be careful, and you might be looked at with suspicion.
Right.
And he got so much aggravation for it. People are like, how dare you say that? How dare you imply that there's any kind of racism in the greatest city in the world? And the reality is he was absolutely right. The conversations that I will have with my son or your mother had with your brother are not anywhere near the kind of conversations that people will have with their African American sons, because it's sadly not necessary for white kids to be wary of being looked at askance. Look at this case of this woman. She's African American. She is going to jail for killing her sexual assaulter who forced her into prostitution. And, is there any doubt that if she were an affluent white woman and somebody had tried to rape her and she killed him, that she would be facing this kind of time behind bars? Never.
No,
ever.
She would be the good guy with a gun.
She'd be a good guy with a gun, a good woman with a gun.
And the proof of why everybody should be armed.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? You're a great point. So my friend Dana Loesch would be doing segments about her, and the NRA would be using her as a poster child. And for some reason, they're not doing that with this woman, which makes no sense to me. Actually, NRA, good idea, great point. Wayne LaPierre, put your money where your mouth is. Here you go. Here's a woman that shot someone in self-defense. You should be on the steps of that courthouse protesting about what happened to her on a daily basis. And some crickets, I think I've heard crickets on that subject.
Yep. If that happens, we're going to get drinks immediately, because that would be a mind you know what.
Yeah.
All right. But okay, switching gears, well, a little bit, but you mentioned weed. And I saw an article on BuzzFeed, which I thought was a really interesting proposition for fixing New York's infrastructure with the money from marijuana and the taxes. So what do you think about that? I thought
I
that's
love
a good
it.
idea.
I love it. Weed sports betting, which New York has not yet legalized. New Jersey has across the river. As somebody who rides the subway every day, and every time I say that, people who are not in New York ask me why I would do that. And I think the subway is the greatest thing in the world. I hate cabs. In New York, the traffic is so awful. It takes forever to get anywhere in a cab or on the bus. The subway, when it's working well, gets you where you need to go very quickly. But the subway is deteriorating quite a bit. And the state of New York, not the city of New York, is responsible for the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which is severely underfunded. And rather than raising rates on all of us, because they keep doing it all the time, look for other sources of revenue. I would love, love, love a dedicated revenue stream from marijuana or sports betting, or open up a casino on the Upper West Side, or do something. Or, I'm sorry, not on the Upper West Side, but Hudson Yards on the west side of New York. But there are ways to pay for the subway. I don't think it would pay for the full freight, but there are ways to do it without constantly forcing riders to pay more and more and more.
Right.
Because this is, the city is becoming unaffordable for a lot of people. And if you raise, I don't even know, I have a monthly Metro card. It's really expensive.
It's about $3. And, if you think of it, that's okay, to and from somewhere, that's $6. That's just assuming you're going to and from. But, for a lot of people, that's lunch.
Yeah.
And again, with weed, if you tax it, just the opportunities for that to fix the subways and to let people just be more efficient too. I think more money will be made if people are getting to work more efficiently.
Sure.
It's a win-win-win.
You tax weed, I'm hypothetically thinking at 10 or 12%, and state sales tax that could be dedicated specifically to, on top of the sales tax that you have in New York already, but that could be dedicated to the subways. I mean, suddenly that's real money. That starts adding up. And whether it's weed, as I said, or sports betting, which the Supreme Court just legalized, and certain states across the country already are engaging in it, there is a tremendous amount of money to be made off of it. And, another idea is the sales tax. Now, the Supreme Court also ruled a few months ago that local municipalities and states can charge on internet sales taxes, an internet sales tax. That's something else to think about. So there's ways to do it, Governor Cuomo. Let's think about it, and not in ways that make poor people in Queens have to pay yet more money to get into the city for their jobs.
Agreed. All right. So what's making you salty this week?
Oh God, so much.
I know. It's a very long. It's a Santa like.
All right. Here's what's making me salty. The party of law and order, my friends on the other side of the aisle, who've been consistently talking about how they are the party of law and order. And here you have not just Michael Cohen, the president's former fixer, but also AMI, the National Enquirer guys, David Pecker and other executives, basically saying that, yes, Donald Trump was in the room when discussions were made about paying off Stormy Daniels and others in exchange for their silence, the Catch and Kill Stories National Enquirer, in exchange for their silence about their affairs with Trump. And the fact that, yes, this was not to protect Melania Trump and her feelings, but it was done because it was right before the election, and they were worried how it was going to affect the election. So I've heard a bunch of nonsense in response to this. Nonsense number one is, no, of course it was done to protect Melania's feelings. Well, the interesting thing is that this affair had happened within days. Affair is a really...
When did the Enquirer care about feelings?
Well, not only that, that's right, but more importantly, that Trump somehow authorized this because he was more worried. He wasn't worried about the campaign. He was worried about Melania, which would not make it a felony or a campaign finance violation. So first and foremost, this affair is a very strong way to put this. This fling happened within days of months of Barron Trump being born. So it happened over a decade ago. And for a decade, he didn't really care about his wife's feelings, right? Suddenly, within a month of the election, we're supposed to believe that he really cares about Melania Trump's feelings. So, and that's why he wanted to kill the story. So let's debunk that myth. The second part of this is, of course, that, this happens all the time, and how many people violate campaign finance. My favorite is Rudy Giuliani. He's like, well, nobody got murdered. Actually, Rudy Giuliani is the epitome of what's making me salty, because Rudy Giuliani, Mayor Squeegee, the man that used to literally arrest squeegee men who try to clean your windshield in New York City, suddenly is like, well, nobody got killed, nobody got murdered, nobody got raped. Yeah, you know what? I don't think a squeegee guy cleaning my windshield without my permission was going to rape or murder me either. He would pick those people up and throw them in jail. The whole broken windows theory of his administration was, if you don't go after the guys that break the windows, you're never going to get the guys that commit murder. So former prosecutor Rudy Giuliani, former mayor Rudy Giuliani, never met a low-level crime that he didn't love. And by the way, this isn't a low-level crime. This is a legit issue. And again, I work in politics. You don't do this. You just don't do this, because that's why we have campaign finance laws. That's why we have the very toothless but still existent Federal Election Commission, to ensure that we don't do this. And, for those that are comparing this to Barack Obama not disclosing, he didn't, those were routine campaign violations, and he paid a very hefty fine for it. But it was not done to commit a felony. It wasn't done to hide something that would have materially affected his campaign. And nobody's made that accusation. And for those that are saying, well, John Edwards got away with this, John Edwards didn't get away with anything. John Edwards, most of the jury was hung on most of the counts with John Edwards, but specifically, they didn't have a witness to back up the allegation that John Edwards paid this woman for electoral purposes. In fact, it sounds to me like he paid her because he was trying to support this baby that he was trying to keep under wraps, not for any electoral purposes. In this case, this was done purely for electoral purposes. He wasn't doing this to support Stormy Daniels and their unborn child. They didn't have a child. He wasn't doing this to help poor Stormy Daniels out, because he would have done that a decade ago if he felt sorry for her. He was doing this for one reason and one reason only. She was threatening to go public, and he did not want that to affect his election. So that's what's making me salty. Rudy Giuliani, just go. I mean, just turn in your bar card. Just go. Enough. I mean, these guys don't know when to leave the stage. And Rudy Giuliani, had he just left it alone, his legacy would have been a noun, a verb, and 9/11. And we all would have known him as America's mayor. But instead, he's embarrassing himself daily and more importantly, undermining his own record on law and order that he worked his entire career to build up.
Yep.
There you go. That's what's making me salty.
All right. So what's making me salty this week are Florida legislators who are failing to enact Amendment 4, which automatically restores voting rights for everyone except those convicted of murder or sex crimes. And the amendment passed completely overwhelmingly with 65% of the vote. And now lawmakers in Florida's capital are saying that they need direction to pass it, and they're hesitating. Well, that's not the point of an amendment that was voted on by the state. It's to get around the legislature. So pass it. It was passed overwhelmingly. And in the people up in Tallahassee are just, we need more direction. No, you got the direction. Florida, the people spoke.
Florida makes you salty every single week.
It does. It does.
It's like the bane of your home state.
I know. I just, every time, because I feel like I can't defend it anymore. I'm just like, the weather's great.
I'm off to Florida next weekend, actually, for 7 magical days.
We'll both be there. And
yes.
Our next segment for what's making you salty, I guess, may come from Florida.
It probably will, because Florida actually, every time I'm there, it makes me salty. I don't appreciate Florida the way other people do. And it turns out I have to go there for work in January as well. And every time I do that, everybody thinks how lucky I am. And all I keep thinking is, no, I just want to go back to New York.
Every time I do come back into the city, though, it's a great feeling.
It really is. I have to say, every time that plane lands and you see the New York City skyline, I actually get a little flutter in my heart.
I know.
Ultimately, either you're a New York girl or you're not. And what was that Carrie Bradshaw thing about Sex and the City that she said the fifth lady in Sex and the City, or Sarah Jessica Parker said this, the fifth lady in the city was New York City. Because she had such a love affair with the city, and so do I, and so do you.
I know. I guess that's our guest today.
New York City, New York City, which hopefully will legalize pot and whatever else they need to do,
and fix the subways.
Because enough already. Come on, it's New York City. How is pot not legal here, and it's legal in Colorado? It's crazy train. Anyway, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week.
All right.